And on the show, I am joined by the woman behind the Fire Drill podcast, Julie Berninger. How are you?
I'm doing excellent, Joe. How are you?
Well, I'm better now that you're here because you're going to carry the show. Thank goodness. We finally got you here. Let's talk podcasting at FinCon. In the past, just generally, were you surprised when you first learned that there was podcasting, that you could do podcasting at FinCon, or did you just kind of assume that from the beginning?
I did not assume it from the beginning. I went the first year as a blogger, and the second year I was inspired to do podcasting, and that's when I dived in.
That's awesome. And you guys did a live one?
Yes, we did. I do a live each year, and it's a must do. It is so fun to record live, and I think the listeners really love it.
They totally do. And we'll get into that more later. But let's dive into some points about podcasting at FinCon. We'll start with this one. Reason number one to come to FinCon if you're a podcaster, and that's to secure sponsors.
Yes. Now, sponsors are the elusive thing that all of us want. You don't necessarily need them, but it can help to monetize your show. And we all know that the overhead costs on podcasting can be a little bit expensive, especially if you outsource. But FinCon attracts dozens and dozens of sponsors that are interested in podcasting. And I think podcasting is kind of the hot thing in the industry right now. So it's easier to attract their attention there.
I'll tell a short story about a sponsorship that I got every year in the early days of my show. I would go and I already had identified the sponsor ahead of time, and I would have coffee with them. But maybe my second FinCon, Julie, I'm walking through the FinCon Central, and Fidelity was there. And I had just met the Fidelity guy the night before. And I said, you know what? There's no way in hell Fidelity's going to sponsor my little show. But I'm going to ask them, right? I'm just going to go up to them and ask them. So I walk up to this guy. His name is Ben. And I said, hey, Ben, have you guys ever thought about sponsoring a podcast? And at that time, he kind of goes, yeah, I don't really know much about podcasts. Tell me about what you do. And so I thought a little bit about like what Fidelity does and what we do. And I tried to draw as many comparisons. You know, we're kind of a laid back, light show. We introduce people to this. You guys do so many 401ks. You get new investors all the time. I think it'd be this perfect fit. And he goes, well, we haven't really allocated money to podcast, but I do have some money for bloggers, and I might be able to, give you some money. How much are you looking for? And then I had this thought. I'm like, do I ask him for a lot because he's Fidelity, or do I ask him for a little? And then and I'm not a smart dude, but I had this one little piece of genius where I said, you know what? I'm going to ask him for next to nothing, because there's no bigger win for me with a little tiny podcast than to be able to say, Stacky Benjamins is brought to you by Fidelity Investments, right? All of a sudden, my listeners think we're this huge thing that we're not yet. So I said, $100 a month. He goes, oh, yeah, deal. What's our commitment? I said 3 months. I said, great. So for 3 months, Julie, I got to say, Stacky Benjamins is brought to you by Fidelity Investments because of FinCon. And by the way, they didn't renew.
That's incredible, though.
They ended up with Gene Chatsky. But have you looked for sponsors at FinCon?
I have. And a tip for everyone, beyond just bringing your business card, consider bringing a media kit. So a media kit is a one-pager where you can highlight stats about your show, about who your listeners are, give some stats about downloads. You can get that really cheap on Etsy. You can download a template and just edit it out, or you can get it for free as well. Joe, do you have one of those?
It's funny. I don't. I have a really old one that I have not updated in forever. And I'm reading a great book that I've told everybody about lately called Influencer. And that's like the first thing on her list. Like why I don't have one, Julie, is beyond me.
And it'll make your life easier. So if anyone emails you a sponsor later, you can just send them the PDF. You already have it created.
Yeah. And what have you found that different brands want to know when you've approached brands at FinCon?
They want to know who your audience is. So demographic breakdown. It's hard to get that information, but you can. I typically get it from my Facebook group members. You can also give them stats on downloads. I know if you're a newer show, you may be a little bit hesitant to provide them with the numbers. And in some cases, it may benefit you to provide the numbers in a different method than just here's the number of downloads. But you can still get sponsors if you're a small show. And I know Andy Hill has a rockin' presentation about how to do that. And he's been so successful. So you need to check that one out.
He very much has. And what's interesting to me about sponsors and going after sponsors is looking ahead of time before you go to FinCon. Like, you can look at who the different brands are at FinCon. I would totally look ahead of time and see who's going to be there and think ahead of time about who you're going to meet up with. Don't do what I do and just walk up to the Fidelity booth and say, hey, I have an idea.
Right. And you want to be memorable because there are a lot of different podcasters and bloggers approaching them. So providing a media kit more than a business card will make you memorable. And then maybe presenting yourself in a way that someone would remember who you are. And that's hard to do. But Joe, I'm sure you have no problem with this.
I don't know. Everything is difficult for me. Next up is to create content on site. This is what I love. Speaking of Andy Hill, who's hanging out with us right now as we make this. By the way, we do these live in our Facebook community. Today, we're doing it specifically in the FinCon podcasting network area. To get access to that, if you go to FinCon and you're a podcaster, you like hanging out with podcasters, just go to finconexpo.com to our show notes, and we'll provide a link there of how to join us. And you might see us do this in the future. But Julie, Andy Hill last year, speaking of Andy, just said, hey, you want to make a video? While I'm standing there. Yes, absolutely. So we put the microphone on and went to town. Andy got a lot of stuff. Chris from Popcorn Finance was just grabbing people and taking them out in the hall.
Yep, I've done that every year, and you don't have to get formal about it. Sometimes your audience will love the behind the scenes nature, and they don't always just listen to one podcast. They probably listen to multiple podcasts. So if you can find other people that they listen to that they may be interested in, it will provide them that extra nugget of cool behind the scenes stuff.
How did you do it? So for the fire drill, how did you present that to your audience?
You can do Facebook Live. You can do marketing collateral. So we would take a lot of pictures when we're at FinCon with other influencers and put them up on Instagram or share them live through Instagram stories. That's really good because you can tag the other influencers. And if they have a bigger audience than you, they'll likely reshare that story, and that can help your audience grow. And their audience will say, oh, wow, this is a friend of that person. And they'll be more likely to follow you too.
That's a great idea. I went from booth to booth. I'm interested in fintech, and there's always a lot of fintech companies there. So I take my little Roland R05 recorder with me, and I can just keep it in my pocket. And if I see something interesting, I ask them. I just say, "Hey, did you mind if we take a couple minutes and make a little piece of the podcast?" So I record it. Plus, we like to start our show with bumpers from people. So. Hi, my name's Julie, and when I'm not doing XYZ, I'm stacking Benjamins. So we got a bunch of those from influencers for the same reason. I thought, if we get one of the keynote speakers as an example to do that, it's great for publicity and for our show.
Absolutely. And I always bring a mic, and I try to schedule things with people that may be a reach for me. So what that means, if I had emailed them cold, there's no way they'd be on this podcast. But because they're at FinCon, they're available. Those are the people that you want to try to get on your show while you're all there. It's easy for them. They're already there.
Do you go through the FinCon list then of attendees ahead of time?
I have done that before in the past.
Yeah. I think that's a really good idea, because then you can kind of have your list of people that you want to make sure you approach while you're there. Because while you're at FinCon, as you know, Julie, for people that haven't been there, it's easy to get distracted.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And actually, some of the biggest influencers and biggest names, they're completely booked because they meet with sponsors all day. So you have to keep in mind, too, that if you go right for the top, like whoever the keynote speaker is, the chances of them having the time to do something with you may be very limited. But it's a good opportunity for you to get a reach guest on your show.
That's a good point. And to clarify, I'm glad you said that, because when I do have my recorder with me and I ask somebody, I ask them, would you have a minute now? Would you have maybe 5 minutes to talk to me, or can we schedule a time later? I don't assume that they have time. Usually people are talking to somebody at the time, and I don't want to interrupt, and I don't want to be rude. So that's great advice. Next up is recording an episode of your show live.
Yes. So this is something that you must do, and you need to sign up for this ahead of time. Just a heads up, make sure that you get on the schedule, make sure that you remind your guest what time it is, because the guest will be busy meeting people and you want them to show up. But our listeners have loved those episodes every year. 2 years ago, we had Brandon from The Mad Scientist on, and we had such a fun episode. Everyone really enjoyed it.
I love doing it. And to your point, because I've been listening to podcasts for a long time. I don't, generally speaking, podcasts that are live from an event, not always the best content, because you'll generally have people standing around. It feels awkward. I'm not in my mom's basement, so the content's not that great, but it doesn't have to be. Your audience, Julie, to your point, they hear that background hum and they know that you're out in the wild instead of being in the place where you usually, that controlled environment. And I think it brings a little sense of excitement to your show that your listeners like.
Absolutely. And you're giving them, again, that behind the scenes inside access. They couldn't go to the conference themselves, but you're there and you're getting access to an influencer that they are interested in.
Question from Andy. Andy says, when does the schedule come out so we can book? Do you have any insight on that?
I believe that there is a link to that in the podcaster's guide to FinCon on how to book.
Yeah, I know that Steve was working on it. I also know a little bit of behind the scenes stuff that I read yesterday, that they're considering some new stuff that I can't talk about yet, but there might even be more opportunities than in the past. So stay tuned there. And if you're not in the, number one, be in the FinCon Podcast Network Facebook group. I would do that. Pay attention to the general Facebook group for FinCon. If it's not out yet, Julie, it's going to be out very soon, I would think.
Yep, Steve will keep us updated. And the other thing you need to know is to bring your own memory card. Do not forget your memory card. You don't have to bring a mic or any other equipment, but if you forget that memory card, you're not going to get the file. Yeah,
just a regular SD card. And remember this, do not forget the SD card when you finish your recording.
Don't walk away. Yeah.
We've seen people do that before, and then Steve has no idea whose it is, and then he has to go back and listen to it. So make sure you bring that. But that's a good point. You don't have to bring your microphone with you or any of your equipment with you. You can if you want. I mean, if you want to have a separate recording area and do more things, you can, but you don't have to bring anything.
No, and I actually typically don't. I bring the mic in my room and I make scheduled appointments, but I'll actually record live on my phone. And even though the audio quality is not as good, if you're sharing things to social media like Instagram, the listeners, they don't care. They want that kind of rough feeling like they're there footage. Yeah,
no, it's such good stuff. Next up, connecting with experts to serve as guests on future episodes. This is your huge opportunity to get some big names on your show.
Yes, absolutely. And big names, they definitely drive big downloads, but interesting stories are more important. So I would use FinCon instead of going around following Pat Flynn, waiting for a chance for him to catch him outside the bathroom or something weird like that. Go find people that are undiscovered and have an interesting conversation at breakfast or lunch and say, wow, that's a cool story. I want to have that person on my show, because that will set you apart. Everyone's interviewed the biggest people.
I love that discussion, especially around FinCon. As an example, Chris Hogan last year at FinCon on 57 financial podcasts. And they all came out roughly the same time, because that's when he's available. A couple of years ago, Clark Howard, same thing. Gene Chatsky, same thing. Around FinCon, everybody gets the same people. This year, everybody be after Ramit and Sharon. I love this idea, though, of differentiation, of looking for something everybody else isn't looking for. And by the way, that's been my issue about, just a quick story. When I first started the podcast, I had Pat Flynn on, and I was very excited about that. And my friend, who's kind of our alpha listener, said, you're all excited about this guy. Who's Pat Flynn? And then I started explaining to him. He goes, but I'm interested in finance, not about side hustle stuff. Like, how do I make the connection? Mm-hmm. And he said, you need to talk more to your audience and less to the FinCon community. I think Pat Flynn's really cool. I think he's cool to all of us, but does that message really resonate with whatever you're trying to do?
Right. And if you do choose to interview someone that's been on a lot of podcasts, you have to provide a different take, because if you want the downloads, you'll get Pat Flynn's followers. But if you bring them on to tell his story, the same story he's told everyone else, that's not going to retain his followers. So you have to think of something new. And to your point, you have to know your audience. What does your audience want? What could he share with your audience that would be valuable? Yeah. That's new.
No, so important. And by the way, everybody at FinCon has a story. I mean, and that's the exciting thing is my old business partner Kathleen and we would just grab people we didn't know. That's how we got to meet Gwen, your former partner.
Yes.
Was we just saw her at FinCon, grabbed her because I had no idea who she was, and said, "Hey, you want to go to lunch?" She said, "Sure." And it was her, Jeremy from Go Curry Cracker, and Kathleen and we laughed our way through lunch, and then found a new friend.
That's a group I love hanging out with. And exactly. So I would actually spend my time doing that. And what you're going to get out of those type of conversations, it's going to be a two-way street and way more long-lasting and beneficial than spending the whole time stalking the largest people.
Yeah, totally agree. Next up, there is a Facebook group apparently called the FinCon Podcast Network Facebook group. Julie, I didn't know that.
I totally know that. That's the place where you can ask questions, connect with people. You definitely need to be in that group. You're already in the group, most likely, but know about it. It's a great resource. Steve
does a great job of moderating, always brings up new things. And there's always new stuff going on with podcasting. I mean, as an example, Apple making a lot of changes right now. You can't see your individual categories. I first read about that here in the Facebook group. So definitely join it. The next up is attending sessions about podcasting, and more podcasting.
Gotta love the sessions. So every year I make sure to split my time between blogging and podcasting sessions, but more and more I've found that the growth opportunity is actually in podcasting, because when you podcast, you have that connection with the listeners. They're hearing your voice every single week. They feel like they know you, they're establishing trust. You have the ability to really go big, I think, with your business through podcasting than with blogging. But it's really hard to get started monetizing your podcast. So if you go to the sessions, you can hear from people who did it in all different creative ways. We've mentioned Andy Hill's session. He has a session on how to get sponsors if you have a smaller podcast. There are a few other sessions of how to grow your downloads. Whitney Hansen has a great one that's coming up. I recommend going to those and getting ideas.
Yeah. I mean, these are people that have been doing this for a little while. They've made a bunch of mistakes already. You don't have to make the same mistakes.
No, and it's a great way to get started if you're a new podcaster. Just being able to copy someone's launch plan is so huge when you don't really know what you're doing.
And for a lot of people in the podcasting area, by the way, we love, as you know, Julie, we love geeking out talking about podcasting anyway. And you go to those podcasting sessions and you talk to people in the chairs around you, and next thing you know, you have a whole new group of friends.
Absolutely. And the friendships can last beyond FinCon. So last year, Andy Hill, Jamila Sufrant, and Whitney Hansen, Gwen and I got together and formed a podcasting mastermind where we met every couple weeks for a year and talked about different things with our shows and growth opportunities and shared strategies and hacks. And we met at FinCon. So that was a really cool place for us to meet and to develop this thing that ended up being really beneficial to all of us.
Yeah, I talked to Nick Loper and Jonathan Mendonza on Facebook. I feel like, Jonathan especially, I feel like at least once a month we talk. But had I not met him at a FinCon, I would have never known who the heck that guy was. Yeah, lots of fun. Next up, and it's funny, we just lost Julie, so we're gonna get Julie back, and here she comes. This is what I love about doing the show live, Julie. We lost you.
I'm back. I don't know what happened, but I'm back.
Fantastic. Next up is, if you're new to podcasting, create your podcast launch plan.
Got it. So I talked a little bit about, if you're new to podcasting, how beneficial it can be, but going to a session like this will give you the step-by-step instruction of how to just do it. And I know I was super overwhelmed when I started podcasting. What mic do I choose? What hosting provider do I choose? What type of website do I need to have? How do I get people to listen to my show right away? And having a blueprint will just make it a little less stressful for you.
What do you think, if you were to start again today, knowing now what you know, would you be asking those same questions first?
I think one thing that we did right, Gwen and I started with a launch audience. We didn't just launch the show. We already had people in the waiting queue. And I would double down on that even more. The mic and things like that are important, but I think we get distracted kind of by those things sometimes, and we forget the bigger picture, which is, who are you speaking to and how do you attract those people?
Yeah, I think new podcasters don't spend enough time thinking about show construction and about how to make better points and interview better. And to your point, way too much time on the equipment.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah.
And also, we made a mistake. We pre-recorded 16 episodes because we were so excited. So that means that if we made any mistakes, we made them 16 times before we got feedback and we listened. We just were really enthusiastic. So, Joe, you're totally right. Maybe give yourself a chance to learn how to be a podcaster, listen to how other people set up their shows, what's the best things to say, how do you get a guest comfortable. Those are important things you should do before you really go wild.
And the one thing I think FinCon will do is it will most of all tell you to just get started. Like go make those mistakes earlier.
Exactly. Take action.
Yeah. Next up on our list is to listen to episodes of the Money and Media podcast for event updates. That would be us. I don't think, do we need to talk about that one?
I don't think we have to because they must already be listening.
If somebody's already here, probably don't need to do that one. Next, and by the way, we're taking these from a guide, from the podcasting guide. We'll have the podcasting guide for you to read if you'd like to on the show notes page at finconexpo.com. Next up is to hire help. I love this idea of finding good help, Julie, at FinCon.
I absolutely love this. So I work full-time in addition to podcasting and blogging and all these things. And I set up the podcast from day one to use outside help. I tried to edit the first few episodes myself. And while it was passable, what I produced, it wasn't the best quality as if I had outsourced. And also it took me hours and hours. I decided to invest in paying someone to edit. And I also pay someone to write my show notes. And that makes it super easy for me to juggle podcasting and blogging and everything I do in my day job.
Yeah, you find great help there. Now, do you just wander the halls? Do you how do you find help at FinCon?
They have a special freelancing event that you can attend, and I think that might be best for finding people who can write your show notes. The show notes, it may seem super easy, but it's important for driving traffic to your podcast that you have really detailed show notes that will be searchable and indexed on Google. I get a lot of new listeners that find me through Google because of my show notes, because they have keywords in them and all of that. So you can find a freelancer there. And then also you can talk to people, other podcasters. Who do they use for audio? Who do they use for different things, social media? I would recommend starting off by building yourself a system that works, that will make you in this for the long term, because you don't want to get burnt out.
Yeah, absolutely. It is totally all about systems because, you know, to your point, you and Gwen made 16 episodes, but at some point the enthusiasm goes away and it's a Sunday night. You don't want to be doing it. And it's only the system that keeps you going.
Exactly. And you will have peaks and valleys and excitement regarding the podcast. And most of the time I am excited, but when I'm going through that valley, I have people that make sure that the podcast goes out on time and my listeners are happy. So there's no interruption depending on my mood.
Right. No, it's beautiful. Next up, meeting with podcasting mentors through the one-on-one mentoring. This is one of my favorite things.
I absolutely love it. So my first year I was mentored by Scott Allen Turner.
Oh,
and
cool.
That was awesome. He was a huge resource. He helped me really think about who my audience was, who I was targeting, and how to speak to them. It was exactly what you're saying, that your audience is not you. So even though you were super jazzed up about Pat Flynn, you need to think about what your audience needs and where they are in their financial journeys. And that was super helpful. But then lately I've been a mentee, or I've been a mentor to someone and I have a mentee. So it's been cool to kind of see myself grow as a podcaster and switch to the other side.
And by the way, definitely sign up to be mentored. I mean, you know, I'm the type of person that I think, oh, I don't want to waste somebody's time. But this is why you're at FinCon. And I'm sure, Julie, you love giving these tips to people. Yes,
everyone loves feeling like an expert. So you give someone a chance to stroke their ego a little bit and to share. And I know personally, if you ask me 2 questions, you're going to get a lot of information because I'm so excited about it. I just want to tell you. So don't be shy, sign up. This is a free resource and we're so lucky that PT and Group set this up for us. So don't not take advantage of it.
Yeah. And definitely the one thing I'd say too, with your mentor, if you're being mentored, make sure you get their contact information, follow up with them. I've had different mentees the last 3 years at FinCon, and 2 of them have been really good about following up with me later. The third one just fell off the map. And I wonder, you know, if she implemented anything, what happened. So don't let that drop. I mean, Scott Allen Turner early in the beginning, that's a great connection to make.
Mm-hmm. I was very lucky for sure. And even when I have been a mentor, you want to help someone new. So I've invited them on my podcast and given them opportunities to reach my audience. So it's a huge help.
That's what I was going to say. To somebody, having Julie as a mentor now is a huge, huge thing. I can just
thank you.
Yeah,
I'm flattered.
Yes, if you could mentor me, that would be. I just went through the list, but is there anything that we forgot, Julie? Are there any points that we should be making for podcasters specifically about FinCon?
I think when my first FinCon, I didn't know what to expect. It's all about the networking. So if you take anything away from what we've talked about here, it's meet as many people as possible and try to meet them on a deeper level. And when you're having conversations with people, don't just start out with, hey, I'm Julie and I have a podcast about financial independence and here's my blog, because everyone has that. You wouldn't be going if you didn't have a podcast or a blog or think about starting one. So try to think of a way that you can pitch your personal story that makes you a little bit more interesting and memorable.
Well, and also to your point earlier, which I love, go in there with the heart of a podcaster, which is you're looking for stories. The best this, I used to have a lot more statistics on the Stacking Benjamin show than I do now. I'm always looking for stories now. And if you go in, I think, looking for somebody's story and listen, I think you're going to do much better. I can't stand it when somebody comes up to me and I feel like they're giving me this verbal, just this verbal signage of who they are, and they're not listening at all to any real conversation.
Exactly. It's about making those deeper connections. And even if they're not going to be an interesting story for your podcast, maybe they'll open the door for someone that would be a perfect fit for your podcast, or sponsorships or media opportunities. One huge thing that I've gotten from FinCon is that there are certain people that are very well connected to the media. When you meet those people and Forbes wants to write an article about financial independence and I know them, they're going to recommend me. Oh. So it's about plugging into the network.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. And in the future, when people know you and they think they have a good story, they reach out to, I've had that happen before. There was this, did you see the thing lately about the armored truck going down the road in Atlanta and all that money, flowing all over the place? No, I had 5 people send it to me because it was kind of funny. All these people pulling over at the side of the road, but because I have this network of people, everybody's like, this would be perfect for your show. It'd be absolutely perfect. So yeah, build that network. I love the fact that you guys took it and made a mastermind out of that. Did that just happen organically there, or did you guys get a hold of each other afterwards and say, let's do this?
I think we started talking about it there, and I've done one before with blogging out of that. And this time with podcasting, we're all in the personal finance niche, but we tried to pick people in the mastermind that approach it a different way.
Yeah.
So Andy uses sponsors. For our podcast, we actually hosted masterminds for our listeners, and that was our monetization model for a while. And Jamila works a lot with the media and brands. And then Whitney is a financial coach, and she has a lot of Instagram and Facebook Live knowledge to share. So it's kind of like bringing together people who we weren't necessarily the best of friends. It's not about joining a group with your best friends. It's about finding people that all add different value, and then you can push each other over the course of the year. Oh,
that's fantastic stuff. I would be remiss. I mean, we're all creators doing this. Your show, your blog, between Fire Drill, the Millennial Boss brand. I can say that quickly. Blah blah blah. You got to tell us what's going on. What's going on with your brands right now?
So my blog, millennialboss.com, is a personal finance and lifestyle blog that is doing well. But my newest excitement is a course that I launched with Cody from Fly to Fi and the Fi Show podcast. And it's called Gold City Ventures. And we teach people how to launch Etsy printable businesses, freelancing businesses, and blogging for profit online.
And I'll bet you're available for interviews to talk about it.
Yes, the Etsy interviews are definitely the ones that are the most popular right now. So I sell bachelorette party downloads. They are a great time. Scavenger hunts, raunchy things. People love talking about them on their podcast. So if you'd like to talk about making a fun, profitable side hustle with bachelorette parties, I'm down.
That's fantastic. And then what's going on in the show?
Fire Drill has been crushing it. We reached over 1 million downloads.
Hey.
Yeah, so we hit that target number. Gwen, my fabulous partner and good friend, has decided to leave the podcast. So I'm going solo and rebranding, and I'm in the process of doing that now.
Nice. Now, do you think this is something that I've gone through before? It's got to be, and our friend Paula Pant did this when Jay Money left her show, and she decided to rebrand it to the Afford Anything podcast. What are you thinking? Can you tell us a little bit about what you're thinking with the rebrand?
So the first thing is that I'm using my full name now. I used to be one of those fire financial independence people that only use their initial. So I was J. So now I go by Julie Berninger, which is my real name. And that's the first step. But also, I'm going to pivot more to the area that I want to be in, which is the side hustle and entrepreneurship space. I'm definitely not a frugal path to financial independence or a saver person. So I'm going to pivot more to what naturally attracts me. And hopefully I'll attract the right listeners who will be interested in my products and what I have to say in the future, because I've niched down to what is true to me.
Does the show format change then because of that, Julie?
I think I'll do a little bit more solo work. I did all interview shows with Gwen at the beginning, and the show format is going to change because I think in the personal finance niche space, we offer a lot of free content to our listeners. And the reason that we get stuck in this monetization hole is because we haven't created that kind of funnel and progression and customer journey. So I'm at the point now where I have a product to sell, which is my online course, and I have to structure my podcast to still be interesting and add value, but also be a profitable business too.
Yeah, almost more like a, just to point out one of the big people doing this, you're talking about like an Amy Porterfield kind of thing.
Yep, exactly. So that's more of the space that I want to move into.
Yeah, boy, that's exciting. And that's a big move though. I mean, that's not a little move.
No, it's not. It's not. And I think when you're making a move like that, you may lose some listeners, because we've had people on the podcast. One of my favorite episodes, we had a woman who was a dumpster diver she gets her food by diving behind the dumpsters of restaurants. And it's incredible what she finds there. Like, you wouldn't believe it. But that is not going to align with my necessarily future path for this podcast. So I need to be more strategic about who I bring on, where I'm taking it.
Well, and that's the hard part, right? I mean, giving up that audience is difficult, but it's not if it's not true to what you're interested in and what you're making. I see people stay too long at what they're doing because they worry about the audience they have now, and they don't want to lose that audience now. You have to be willing to give that away. Right.
So if we're getting 10,000 downloads per episode, and now I'm getting 7, it doesn't really matter in the long run.
Yeah.
If I have 7 of the right people.
Last question. If people are interested in the course, by the way, that specifically, how do they get a hold of you for that?
They can go to goldcityventures.com.
Awesome. Well, thanks for hanging out, talking about podcasting a little bit, Julie. You and I don't talk enough, and it was great chatting with you about this.
It was great. Next time when you're in Seattle, let me know.
Amen.